Jaguar today is not a brand often seen in motorsport, unless of course you're one of the 11 people who actually watches Formula E. But only a couple of short decades ago, this couldn't have been further from the truth. Cars like the XJR9 carried forward a decades-long legacy of competitive and innovative racing, which in the early 1990s, Jaguar sought to take advantage of on the road.
But even if you lived in a house as grand as this, there is one car that can match the value of your home. The Jaguar XJ220.
The 80s and early 90s were good times for Jaguar's racing efforts, and their perception as a force to be reckoned with on the track was riding a high. At some point in the midst of this success, Jaguar management considered their road cars to be too far removed from its racing program, and they weren't properly capitalising on their brand equity. See, I know business speak. During this time, Jaguar had effectively outsourced a large portion of its racing efforts to Tom Walkinshaw and his creatively named team, Tom Walkinshaw Racing. Tom Walkinshaw was also keen to capitalise on the success and technology of Jaguar's Racing High, and had already completed what could be considered a pilot programme in the form of the Jaguar XJR15. While the XJR15 project hadn't been perfect, it had paved the way for Jaguar to produce a slightly more road-friendly supercar, a true enthusiast dream. It was to be beautiful, expensive, and stunningly fast. The birth of the XJ220 began with a man named Jim Randall, the director of engineering at Jaguar. It was in 1987 that Randall began to draw up a plan for the XJ220. At the time, rule changes meant that the Jaguar's fuel-hungry V12 engines on its Group C car, the XJR9 at the time, was to be replaced ahead of the upcoming iterations for the vehicle, the XJR10 and the XJR11. With this on the horizon, Randall wanted to find another way to deploy the engine. He saw the XJ220 as a perfect opportunity to do that. Over the Christmas of 1987, Jim Randall built a 1:4 scale cardboard model of a potential Group B racing car. A model that would, after much tweaking, eventually become the XJ220. Randall's cardboard model was taken to the Jaguar studio, where it was reworked by the designers to adopt a more Jaguar look. However, at the time, Randall's project had no official support from the company. He was left with no other option than to make do with volunteers who agreed to work on the project in the evenings and at weekends on their own time. This may sound like a recipe for failure, but let's not forget some of the fantastic machines born out of the passion of a small group of engineers. I'm looking at you, Mira. Randall's team came to be known as the Saturday Club. In all, the team was made up of 12 volunteers who worked to flesh out the XJ220's concept design. Randall's car was based on FIA's Group B regulations. This meant the car would be mid-engined with Jaguar's V12 engine as the power source, and it would have all-wheel drive. For the project to be approved by Jaguar's management, Randall's team needed to provide meaningful information to the engineers pertaining to aerodynamics, particularly at high speeds, handling, and perhaps most important of all, convince management that there was a demand for such an outrageous car. All these, coupled with FIA racing regulations as well as government regulations, would warp the overall design of the vehicle. Thanks to Randall's far-reaching connections within the motorsport industry, constructing the XJ220 concept car didn't break the bank. Randall called in favours from component suppliers and engineering companies that both he and Jaguar had worked with in the past. In exchange, he offered to give them public recognition for their role in the development of the car, and of course there was a wink and a nudge relating to the potential future of contracts with Jaguar. The name of the car, XJ220, was chosen in line with the naming of the XK120. The name refers to the top speed of the particular model, given in miles per hour. Based on the design of the concept car, the XJ220 had a targeted top speed of 220 miles per hour. This would have made the XJ220 the fastest production car in the world at the time. By October the 18th, 1988, the XJ220 concept car was completed. Just 3 hours after it was completed, it was moved to Jaguar's stand at the British International Motor Show, held at the NEC in Birmingham. That's right, they finished building the car at 3 AM and it was unveiled to the public the same morning. How very British. That day, the XJ220 received overwhelmingly positive reviews from both the public and the press. Some wealthy Jaguar enthusiasts even offered blank cheques to the company to secure their purchase of the car should it go into production. To put more context around the huge amounts of attention the XJ220 received at this motor show, Ferrari's flagship F40 was also on display, and the Jaguar got 90,000 more visitors. The prospects for the future of the XJ220 were clear, and even Jaguar's executives were surprised by the response. Jaguar chairman at the time, John Egan, and Roger Putnam, the man in charge of Jaguar's racing activities, had themselves only seen the XJ220 a week prior to the motor show. It was not intended to be a production car, but that changed quickly after the reception of the concept car at the motor show, and the financial interest shown by some serious buyers. Immediately after the event, Jaguar carried out a feasibility study on the concept car, and concluded that the XJ220 would be financially viable and technically feasible, following some modifications. By December of 1988, the company announced that the XJ220 would be produced with a limited run of 350 cars, and by January 1st, the price of the XJ220 was confirmed: £290,000, excluding VAT, bastards. That's around £670,000 in today's money, and probably around £700,000 in tomorrow's money. As per the feasibility reports, the XJ220 concept car had to be reworked for production. Tom Walkinshaw Racing and Jaguar Sport were put in charge of the project to develop and build the XJ220. One of the major changes made for the production version of the XJ220 was its engine. Instead of the Jaguar V12 used in the concept version, a twin-turbocharged V6 engine was used instead, much to the ire of those who had agreed to buy the cars. Furthermore, they decided to ditch the all-wheel drive system in favour of a cheaper rear-wheel drive only layout, as if the buyers weren't annoyed enough about the engine having half as many cylinders as they were told it would. On the exterior, the production version retained the same style aluminium body as the concept version. However, the scissor doors were dropped, which is arguably worse than the engine. As a result, sales of the XJ220 were very poor. They only planned to build 350 in the first place, and they couldn't even sell that many, managing to sell a total of 282. With a top speed of 212 miles per hour attained by the XJ220 thanks to its 542 horsepower twin-turbocharged V6 engine, the car was briefly recognised by the Guinness Book of World Records as the fastest production car of all time. Jaguar would hold this record for a few years, until the McLaren F1 stormed the scene. You can watch my video about the F1 here. Thanks for watching.
If you bought your XJ220 for the ultimate in driving pleasure, you just can't lose.